Marcus Williams was a man who lived by routine. Every day followed the same rhythm: wake up early, head to work, and then, as the sun began its descent, make his way to the gym. The gym wasn't just a place for him to lift weights or run on the treadmill. It was his sanctuary. It was where he could leave behind the stress of the day, focus on himself, and recharge. At 32 years old, Marcus had spent years building not only his body but also his character. He was known in his community as someone who stood for fairness and respect. He believed that everyone deserved to feel safe, no matter where they were. On this particular Thursday evening, Marcus walked into the gym like he always did, carrying his duffel bag over one shoulder. The familiar sounds greeted him: the clanging of weights, the whirring of machines, and the low hum of conversations. He nodded at a few regulars as he passed by, exchanging polite smiles. Everything seemed normal, just another night at the gym. But as Marcus set his bag down near the squat rack and started warming up, something unusual caught his attention. Across the room, near the water fountain, a group of men had gathered. They weren't doing anything out of the ordinary at first glance. They were standing around, laughing and chatting. But there was something about their body language that made Marcus uneasy. They weren't just talking among themselves. They were pointing and gesturing towards someone nearby. Marcus squinted slightly, trying to see what, or rather, who, they were focused on. That's when he noticed her. A young woman, petite and slender, with jet black hair tied neatly into a ponytail, was working out a few feet away from them. She looked new to the gym, someone Marcus hadn't seen before. She moved quietly, almost invisibly, clearly trying to stay out of the spotlight. But the men's behavior suggested otherwise. Their laughter grew louder, more mocking. One of them mimicked her movements as she attempted to lift a dumbbell, exaggerating her form to make it look clumsy. Another leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, sneering. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. He recognized this kind of behavior all too well. Growing up, he'd been on the receiving end of similar treatment. Kids at school would tease him for being different, for standing out. Back then, he didn't have anyone to stand up for him. Now, as an adult, he had vowed never to let anyone else suffer in silence, if he could help it. As he continued warming up, Marcus kept glancing over at the scene unfolding near the water fountain. The woman, her name tag said Sarah, was visibly uncomfortable. She tried to ignore the men, keeping her head down and focusing on her workout. But their taunts grew louder, more aggressive. They called her names, made crude jokes about her appearance, and even laughed when she accidentally dropped a weight. Each insult hit like a punch, though Sarah refused to show how much it affected her. Other people in the gym seemed to notice too, but no one intervened. Some looked away awkwardly, pretending not to hear. Others hurried past, avoiding eye contact altogether. It was as if everyone had collectively decided that this wasn't their problem. But Marcus couldn't do that. He knew that staying silent wouldn't solve anything. It would only give the bullies permission to keep going. As he loaded plates onto the barbell for his next set, Marcus's mind raced. Should he step in? What would happen if he did? Would it escalate things? Or would it stop the harassment once and for all? He took a deep breath, gripping the bar tightly. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just stand by and watch. Marcus had seen enough. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, heavier than any barbell he'd ever lifted. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah, her quiet determination overshadowed by the cruel taunts of men who clearly got some twisted satisfaction from making others feel small. As he stood there, gripping the barbell, his mind flashed back to moments from his own childhood. Memories of being teased on the playground came rushing back. Kids calling him names, mocking his height, or making fun of his clothes because they weren't cool enough. Back then, he'd felt powerless, too young, and unsure of himself to stand up against them. But now, as an adult, he realized something important. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was strong, not just physically but mentally, and he knew exactly what it meant to be on the receiving end of someone else's cruelty. With a deep breath, Marcus set the barbell down carefully, ensuring it wouldn't clatter noisily against the rack. Every movement felt deliberate, calculated. He wiped his hands on a towel, took another moment to steady himself, and then turned toward the group near the water fountain. His heart pounded in his chest, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. What he was about to do wasn't easy, but it was necessary. He could feel the eyes of other gym-goers flickering toward him as he walked across the room, their curiosity piqued. Some seemed surprised that anyone would dare intervene. Others appeared relieved that someone finally had the courage to step in. As Marcus approached the group, his presence immediately commanded attention. Standing at 6'3" with broad shoulders and a confident stride, he wasn't someone who blended into the background. The three men turned to face him, their laughter dying down slightly as they registered his approach. One of them, the leader of the group, raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening as if daring Marcus to say something. "What's up, big guy?" he said casually, though his tone carried a hint of challenge. "You lost or something?" Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, planting his feet firmly on the ground. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was a fire burning behind his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the group before landing squarely on the leader. The man chuckled, clearly unimpressed. "Nah, man. Just having some fun," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward Sarah, who was still standing nearby, her head bowed low. "Why? You got a problem with that?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his jaw tightening. "Fun," he repeated, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. "Doesn't look like fun to me. Looks more like harassment." His voice grew firmer, each word carrying a weight that silenced the room. "And if you don't stop, I'll make sure everyone in here knows exactly what kind of fun you're having." For a brief second, the entire gym went quiet. Even the sound of machines and treadmills seemed to fade into the background. The leader's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He glanced at his friends, seeking reassurance, but they avoided his gaze, suddenly uneasy. No one had expected this, a stranger stepping in, calling them out so boldly. It was as if Marcus had flipped a switch, turning their bravado into doubt. Sarah, who had been trying to stay invisible, looked up cautiously, her wide eyes meeting Marcus's for a split second. In that moment, she saw something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time since entering the gym that evening, she didn't feel entirely alone. Someone had noticed her struggle, and more importantly, someone was willing to do something about it. Marcus didn't break eye contact with the leader, even as the man shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. He could see the wheels turning in the man's head, weighing his options. Would he double down on his behavior, risking further confrontation? Or would he back off, realizing that the odds were no longer in his favor? The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone waited to see what would happen next, including Marcus. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going anywhere until this ended. The leader of the group, sensing that Marcus wasn't backing down, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His smirk returned, though it lacked its earlier confidence. "Harassment," he repeated, dragging out the word as if it were ridiculous. "Man, you're blowing this way out of proportion. We're just messing around. Lighten up, will ya?" Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture unyielding. The calmness in his voice didn't waver, but there was an edge to it now, sharp enough to make the man hesitate. "Messing around," Marcus replied, his tone measured but firm. "Is that what you call making fun of someone for no reason? Is that what you call tearing someone down because you think it's funny? If that's your idea of a good time, then maybe you need to rethink what kind of person you want to be." The room felt electric, every eye fixed on the unfolding confrontation. Gym goers who had previously avoided looking in the group's direction were now watching intently, some even pausing mid-workout to see how things would play out. The air seemed heavier, charged with tension. Sarah, still standing nearby, kept her head low but stole quick glances at Marcus, her expression a mix of gratitude and anxiety. She wanted to believe that Marcus could defuse the situation, but she also feared it might escalate further. One of the other men in the group, emboldened by the leader's initial bravado, decided to chime in. "Come on, man," he said, attempting to sound casual but failing to mask the defensiveness in his voice. "We're just joking around. Can't you take a joke?" Marcus turned his gaze toward the speaker, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A joke?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but laced with intensity. "If it's such a great joke, why does it come at someone else's expense? Why does it make her feel like she doesn't belong here? Tell me, does that sound like harmless fun to you?" The man opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it again, clearly struggling to find a comeback. Marcus's words had struck a nerve, not just with him, but with everyone listening. Even the gym staff, who had been keeping a wary distance, exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that they might need to step in soon if the situation didn't resolve itself. The leader, growing increasingly agitated, tried to regain control of the narrative. "Look, buddy," he said, stepping closer to Marcus, his tone dripping with false camaraderie. "You don't know us, and you don't know what's going on here, so why don't you mind your own business and let us handle this?" Marcus didn't budge. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his towering frame making the leader instinctively take a half-step back. "This is my business," Marcus said, his voice steady and commanding. "Because when someone is being treated unfairly, it becomes everyone's business. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you're not as tough as you think you are." The leader's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment. It was hard to tell. He glanced at his friends again, searching for support, but they avoided his gaze, their earlier cockiness evaporating under Marcus's unwavering presence. The third member of the group muttered something under his breath, too quiet for anyone to hear, but loud enough to suggest he was ready to leave. Sensing that he was losing ground, the leader attempted one last-ditch effort to assert dominance. He gave Marcus a light shove, barely more than a tap on the shoulder, but enough to test his reaction. "Back off, big guy," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "You don't want to mess with us." Marcus didn't react immediately. He simply stared at the man, letting the silence stretch for a few seconds. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed the leader's wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to send a clear message. "Don't push me," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying a weight that silenced the entire room. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Don't make me regret it." For a moment, nobody moved. The leader's bravado crumbled completely, replaced by a flicker of fear in his eyes. His friends exchanged panicked looks, clearly unsure of what to do next. It was as if the roles had reversed. The bullies were now the ones feeling cornered. And Marcus, standing tall and resolute, had made it abundantly clear that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Over time, the ripple effect of Marcus's actions continued to grow, touching lives in ways he never could have predicted. The gym, once a place where people worked out in silence or avoided conflict altogether, transformed into a space filled with energy and connection. Conversations flowed more freely between members, and strangers greeted each other with warm smiles. People who had previously felt invisible or unwelcome now walked through the doors with their heads held high, knowing they belonged there. One day, as Marcus entered the gym, he noticed a new sign hanging near the front desk. It read, "Respect starts here." Below the bold letters was a list of guidelines outlining how members should treat one another, with kindness, inclusivity, and respect. Linda, the manager, stood nearby, beaming as she watched people read it. When she spotted Marcus, she waved him over. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said sincerely. "Your courage inspired us all." Marcus shook his head modestly. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "Everyone here chose to step up after that night. You're the one who made sure those changes stuck." Linda nodded thoughtfully but insisted, "Still, you lit the spark. And look at what's happened since." She gestured around the room, where trainers were leading group sessions on mental health awareness and conflict resolution. Members exchanged tips on workouts, cheered each other on during tough sets, and even organized social events outside the gym. The sense of community had grown stronger than ever. For Sarah, the transformation was personal. No longer did she feel like an outsider tiptoeing through her workouts. Instead, she embraced the gym as her second home, a place where she not only grew physically stronger, but also found confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Working out alongside Marcus gave her a sense of purpose, and their friendship deepened with every shared conversation. They talked about life beyond the gym, dreams, fears, and lessons learned along the way. Through Marcus, Sarah realized that strength wasn't just about lifting weights, it was about standing tall, even when the world tried to knock you down. The impact extended beyond the gym walls, too. Word of Marcus's bravery reached others in the community, inspiring them to take similar stands against injustice in their own lives. A local newspaper ran a story titled "Everyday Heroes," how one man changed a community, highlighting how Marcus's simple act of stepping forward had sparked meaningful change. Friends and acquaintances began reaching out to share their own stories of overcoming bullying or harassment, thanking Marcus for reminding them that they weren't alone. Despite the attention, Marcus remained grounded. He didn't see himself as extraordinary, just someone doing what anyone else would do if given the chance. Yet he understood the importance of leading by example. Every time he showed up at the gym, ready to lift weights or encourage others, he reinforced the idea that kindness and courage went hand in hand. Months later, Sarah approached Marcus with an idea. "What if we started something bigger?" she asked one evening after their workout. "Like a mentorship program for people who feel intimidated coming to the gym. We could pair them with experienced members to help them get comfortable." Marcus grinned, loving the concept immediately. "That's brilliant," he said. "Let's talk to Linda about it tomorrow." Together, they pitched the idea to the management team, which enthusiastically supported it. The program launched within weeks, pairing newcomers with mentors who guided them through workouts while fostering friendships. Many participants credited the initiative with helping them overcome self-doubt and build resilience, not just in fitness, but in life. Looking back, Marcus knew the confrontation at the water fountain had been just the beginning. It wasn't about stopping bullies or winning arguments. It was about creating a culture where everyone felt valued and safe. Sometimes, confronting evil meant refusing to stay silent. Other times, it meant planting seeds of hope and watching them grow into something beautiful. As Marcus packed up his gym bag one evening, he glanced around the bustling room. Laughter echoed off the walls. Music played softly in the background, and people moved with purpose, supporting one another in countless small ways. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel proud, not because he'd changed everything, but because he'd reminded everyone that change was possible. All it took was one person willing to stand up and say, "Enough." The woman at the center of the commotion was Sarah Chen. She wasn't someone who frequented the gym during peak hours. She preferred quieter times when the machines weren't crowded, and the atmosphere felt calm. But tonight, her schedule had been thrown off by an unexpected meeting at work, leaving her with no choice but to come later than usual. Sarah had always been shy, someone who kept to herself and avoided drawing attention. At the gym, she liked blending into the background, focusing on her own goals without distractions. Unfortunately, tonight, staying unnoticed wasn't an option. Sarah adjusted her grip on the dumbbells, trying to concentrate on her bicep curls. Her movements were deliberate, careful. She knew she wasn't a professional weightlifter, but she didn't need to be one to know how to lift properly. Still, the group of men near the water fountain seemed determined to make her feel incompetent. Their laughter echoed across the room, sharp and cutting, slicing through the otherwise steady hum of activity. One of them mimicked her form in an exaggerated way, bending his arms awkwardly while his friends roared with amusement. Another leaned against the wall, shaking his head as if he'd never seen anything so ridiculous in his life. "You call that lifting?" One of them called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Looks like you're struggling to pick up a pencil." His words were followed by more laughter, louder this time. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she refused to look at them. Instead, she focused harder on her breathing, counting each rep in her head. 1, 2, 3. She told herself it didn't matter what they thought. They didn't know her, and their opinions shouldn't affect her. But deep down, their comments stung. Each insult felt like a tiny pebble being tossed into a pond, creating ripples that spread wider than she wanted to admit. As the teasing continued, Sarah noticed other gym-goers glancing in her direction. Some looked sympathetic, offering fleeting smiles or nods before quickly looking away. Others seemed uncomfortable, shifting their gaze anywhere but toward the scene unfolding near the water fountain. No one stepped forward to say anything. It was as if an invisible barrier existed between her and the rest of the room, separating her from the people who might have helped. For a moment, Sarah wondered why no one intervened. Did they think it wasn't their place? Were they afraid of becoming targets themselves? Or did they simply assume she could handle it on her own? Despite the rising tension, Sarah tried to push through. She moved to a different station, hoping that putting some distance between herself and the men would give her a chance to regroup. She grabbed a resistance band and started working on her legs, keeping her movements slow and steady. But the men weren't done yet. One of them followed her lead, mimicking her new exercise with exaggerated grunts and groans. "Wow, look at those squats," he exclaimed sarcastically. "You sure you're not gonna break something?" By now, Sarah's hands were trembling, not from exertion, but from frustration and embarrassment. She hated feeling powerless, especially in a place where she came to feel strong. The gym was supposed to be a space for growth, both physically and mentally. Yet here she was, reduced to a target for someone else's cruel amusement. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave the gym altogether and never come back. But another part of her refused to let them win. She reminded herself why she was here, to improve herself, to take control of her life, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. Still, the situation was spiraling out of control. The men's taunts grew louder, more aggressive. They began making comments not just about her workout, but about her appearance too. Maybe she should stick to yoga, one of them sneered, or maybe knitting. His friends burst into laughter, slapping him on the back as if he delivered the punchline of the century. Sarah clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay composed. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to lash out, to yell back, to defend herself. But years of avoiding conflict had taught her that confrontation often made things worse. So instead, she bit her tongue and kept moving, even as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. In that moment, Sarah felt utterly alone. The gym, once a refuge, now felt suffocating. She glanced around, searching for any sign of support, any indication that someone might step in to help. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. A tall figure walking toward the group of men with purposeful strides. For the first time that evening, Sarah allowed herself to hope. As Marcus walked toward the exit, he could feel the weight of the evening's events settling over him. His heart was still racing, not from fear or anger, but from the adrenaline that came with standing up for what was right. He knew he'd done the right thing, but moments like these always left him with a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, there was satisfaction in knowing he'd made a difference. On the other, there was an ache, a deep awareness that situations like this shouldn't happen in the first place. The world should be better than this. Before he could reach the door, someone called out to him. "Hey, wait." It was Sarah. She jogged over, clutching her water bottle tightly in both hands as if it were a lifeline. Her face was flushed. Whether from embarrassment or gratitude, it was hard to tell. When she stopped in front of him, she hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of what to say. Finally, she held out the bottle toward him. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "This is all I have right now, but please take it." Marcus smiled warmly, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "And you definitely don't need to give me anything. Just promise me you'll keep coming here. Don't let those guys scare you away." Sarah nodded quickly, her dark eyes shining with emotion. "I will," she said, her voice firmer now. "I mean it. You didn't just stand up for me. You reminded me that I deserve to be here. That everyone deserves to be here." She paused, biting her lip nervously before adding, Can I ask you something? Why did you do it? Most people wouldn't have stepped in." The question caught Marcus off guard, not because he hadn't thought about it himself, but because it forced him to put into words something he often felt instinctively. He took a deep breath, considering his answer carefully. "Because no one stood up for me when I needed it," he admitted finally, his gaze drifting toward the floor. "When I was younger, I got bullied a lot. Kids would tease me for being different, for not fitting in. And back then, I didn't have anyone to defend me. So I promised myself that if I ever saw someone else going through that, I wouldn't stay silent." Sarah listened intently, her expression softening with understanding. "That's really brave," she said quietly. "Most people would have looked away. They might have wanted to help, but they wouldn't have actually done it. You didn't hesitate." Marcus shrugged modestly, though there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. "It's not about being brave," he said. "It's about doing what's right. If we all stood by and let bad things happen, nothing would ever change. Sometimes, it's not even about winning. It's about showing people that they're not alone." Their conversation was interrupted by applause, soft at first, but growing louder as more gym-goers joined in. Marcus turned to see several people clapping, some even giving him thumbs up or nodding in approval. One older man approached him, extending his hand. "That was incredible," he said sincerely. "You handled that perfectly. Thank you for stepping in." Marcus shook the man's hand, feeling the warmth spread through him despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. "I just did what anyone should have done," he replied humbly. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. Not everyone would have stepped forward. Not everyone would have risked confrontation to protect someone they didn't even know. And while he didn't want recognition for doing the right thing, he couldn't deny that the support meant something. As the crowd dispersed and the gym returned to its usual rhythm, Sarah lingered beside Marcus. "Do you come here often?" she asked tentatively. "I mean, maybe we could work out together sometime. Or, I don't know, grab coffee after." Marcus chuckled lightly, surprised by the invitation but touched all the same. "Sure," he said with a nod. "I think that'd be nice. We can spot each other next time. I'm pretty sure your form is better than mine anyway." Sarah laughed, the sound light and genuine, breaking through the heaviness of the evening. For the first time since arriving at the gym, she looked relaxed, almost happy. As they exchanged numbers and promised to meet again, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Standing up to bullies wasn't easy, but moments like this reminded him why it mattered. Every action, no matter how small, had the power to create ripples, to inspire others, to build connections, to remind people that kindness still existed in the world. By the time Marcus stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. The evening hadn't gone as planned, but sometimes the best things in life happened when you least expected them. Word of Marcus's actions spread faster than he could have imagined. By the next morning, the gym staff had already heard about what happened from multiple members who couldn't stop talking about it. Stories tend to grow legs in places like gyms, where people gather regularly and share their experiences. Some recounted how Marcus had single-handedly confronted the bullies, while others emphasized his calm demeanor and unwavering courage. Everyone seemed to agree on one thing. Marcus hadn't just stood up for Sarah. He'd reminded everyone present that bullying had no place in their community. The gym manager, a middle-aged woman named Linda, decided to take action. She called an impromptu meeting with her team to discuss ways they could prevent similar incidents in the future. "We pride ourselves on being a safe space," she said firmly during the meeting. "But last night showed us that we need to do more to enforce that promise." Together, they drafted new anti-harassment policies, including clearer guidelines for addressing disruptive behavior and steps to support victims. They also announced plans to host workshops on conflict resolution and inclusivity, ensuring that members felt empowered to speak up if they witnessed anything inappropriate. For Sarah, life began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. After exchanging numbers with Marcus, she found herself looking forward to their planned workouts together. What started as a simple gesture of gratitude blossomed into something deeper, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals. During their sessions, Marcus encouraged Sarah to push past her limits, cheering her on when she doubted herself. In return, Sarah inspired Marcus to reflect on his own journey, reminding him of why he valued kindness and resilience so deeply. Their partnership didn't go unnoticed. Other gym-goers began approaching them, asking for advice or simply expressing admiration for how they supported each other. Slowly but surely, the dynamic within the gym changed. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly. Conversations flowed more freely, creating a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Even those who hadn't witnessed the confrontation firsthand felt its impact, an unspoken understanding that everyone belonged there, regardless of skill level or background. Marcus noticed these changes too, though he remained humble about his role in sparking them. He continued showing up to the gym at his usual time, sticking to his routine without seeking attention. But he couldn't deny the difference in the atmosphere. Strangers thanked him for setting an example, while others confided in him about their own struggles with bullying or harassment. Each interaction reinforced his belief that standing up for someone else wasn't just about stopping bad behavior, it was about planting seeds of change. One evening, as Marcus and Sarah worked out together, a young man approached them hesitantly. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the strap of his gym bag. "Oh, hi," he began, glancing between the two of them. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say thanks to both of you." "For what?" Sarah asked, tilting her head curiously. The man shrugged, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I saw what happened last week, the whole thing with those guys. I've been coming here for months, and I always felt like an outsider, like I didn't fit in. But seeing you two stand up for yourselves, and for each other, made me realize this place can be welcoming if we make it that way." Marcus smiled, nodding in agreement. "That's exactly right," he said. "It starts with all of us. If we look out for one another, no one has to feel alone." By the end of the conversation, the young man was smiling too, visibly relieved to have shared his thoughts. As he walked away, Sarah turned to Marcus, her eyes shining with admiration. "You know," she said softly, "you didn't just help me that night. You helped everyone, even people you didn't know. That's pretty amazing." Marcus chuckled lightly, brushing off the compliment. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about what we do next. One moment of courage is great, but real change happens when we keep showing up, for ourselves and for each other." And that's exactly what they did. Week after week, Marcus and Sarah became fixtures at the gym, not just as workout partners, but as symbols of strength and solidarity. Their presence inspired others to step forward, to speak out against negativity, and to create a culture of respect and kindness. It wasn't always easy. There were still tough days, moments when old habits threatened to creep back in, but every small victory reminded them why it mattered. Through it all, Marcus carried a quiet pride, not because he'd been hailed as a hero, but because he played a part in building something bigger than himself. Sometimes, change. The leader's bravado shattered like glass under Marcus's firm grip. For a moment, he froze, his eyes darting between Marcus's face and the hand wrapped around his wrist. His friends, who had been standing behind him just moments earlier, began to inch away, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. They weren't laughing now. In fact, none of them dared to make a sound. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of machines still running in the background. "You think you're tough?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. He didn't raise it or shout. There was no need. His tone alone carried enough weight to silence anyone within earshot. Pushing someone smaller than you, mocking someone because they're minding their own business, that's not toughness. That's cowardice. And if you don't stop right now, I'll show you what real strength looks like. The leader tried to pull his arm free, but Marcus held firm without applying too much pressure. It wasn't about hurting the man. It was about making him understand that this wasn't a situation he could bully his way out of. "Let go," the leader muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Gone was the cocky smirk, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. Marcus released his grip slowly, deliberately, letting the man take a step back. But he didn't move away himself. Instead, he stood his ground, towering over the group like an immovable force. "I'm done talking," Marcus said, his words cutting through the tense silence. "You've got two choices. Leave quietly or deal with the consequences. Your call." The leader glanced at his friends again, but they were already edging toward the exit, clearly eager to escape the scene. One of them muttered something under his breath, maybe an apology, maybe a curse, but it was impossible to tell. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. Their body language said everything. Heads down, shoulders hunched, feet shuffling awkwardly as they retreated. The leader hesitated for a second longer, glaring at Marcus as if trying to muster one last burst of defiance. But when Marcus took a single step forward, the man flinched visibly and turned on his heel, hurrying after his friends. As the trio disappeared through the gym doors, the tension in the room lifted almost instantly. People exhaled breaths they hadn't realized they'd been holding. A few gym-goers exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly in Marcus's direction. Others whispered to each other, their voices filled with admiration for what they had just witnessed. Even the trainers, who had been hovering nearby, in case things escalated further, relaxed slightly, though one of them approached Marcus to ensure everything was okay. Sarah, who had been watching from a distance, finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water bottle, her mind racing with emotions, relief, gratitude, and even a hint of disbelief. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Just moments ago, she had felt utterly powerless, convinced that no one would stand up for her. Now, thanks to Marcus, the bullies were gone, and she could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. But Marcus didn't linger to bask in the attention or soak up the praise. He turned to Sarah, his expression softening immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his deep voice carrying none of the intensity it had moments before. Sarah nodded quickly, though tears welled up in her eyes. "Ah, yes," she stammered. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Marcus gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let people like that make you feel small. You belong here just as much as anyone else." His words were simple, but they carried so much meaning. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and managed a shaky smile. "I won't," she said softly. "I promise." Around them, the gym gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Machines whirred back to life, weights clanged against racks, and conversations resumed. But something had shifted. The atmosphere felt different now. Lighter, safer. People who had previously avoided eye contact with Sarah now offered her encouraging nods or smiles as they passed by. Someone even stopped to compliment her form during a set of lunges, making her blush with surprise. It was as if Marcus's actions had sparked a ripple effect, reminding everyone present of the importance of kindness and respect. As Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, He couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. Standing up to those men hadn't been easy, and part of him wondered if he pushed too hard or said too much. But looking around the gym now, seeing how people interacted differently, he knew he'd done the right thing. It wasn't about winning a fight or proving a point. It was about creating a space where everyone,